Rip City Mornings.
The Oregon Ducks will officially open up their fall camp. Dan Lanning and the boys getting ready for Portland State and then Texas Tech and then a full slate of games in 2023. And despite what you may read on whatever we're calling this thing, I don't know what we call it anymore. But regardless of whatever you read, there will be football played in 2023. There will be 12 teams competing in a conference on the Pacific side of the country. And joining us now, I just had a fun conversation with him on Friday. And you know what? We're going to roll it back to have another conversation in the AM from ScoopDuck, friend of the program, back on the big show, Joel Gunderson. Hey, Joel, good to talk to you again, buddy.
It's been a long time, but it's a whole new audience. So
a whole new one. And by the way, if people want to hear what Joel or myself think about conference realignment, we had a wide-ranging conversation on Friday. You can find that at ripcityradio.com. Joel, I'd like to talk some football with you. If you don't mind, I'd like to because I want to be excited. I don't know about you. I may or may not have had my TikTok algorithm is now just full of college football entrance videos. I'm completely jacked for the season, regardless of all the conference talk. But let's just start with an overview, because one of the things I always liked about Mike Bellotti is that Mike Bellotti did not always have perfect seasons, clearly. But when Mike Bellotti had struggles, he made adjustments in the offseason. I thought he was incredibly good at not getting beat the same way twice, whether it was changing up the offense in 2005, making some changes at coordinator. But I've always thought Bellotti was very good at kind of winning the offseason. It's a different world in college football now with transfer portals and everything else. But from year one to year two, what do you think are the adjustments that maybe Dan Lanning is going to make now that he's had a year as a head coach? I mean, very good season, don't get me wrong, but year one to year two, I could imagine there might be some things that he knows this year that maybe he didn't know last year.
Oh, for sure. And I think a lot of it is stuff that we don't see on a day-to-day, or we might not see even on a given Saturday. But, when you're going, think of any job that you've started and the first couple of weeks, you feel like you're just swimming completely upstream. And once you start to find your legs a little bit, then you become a little bit more adept at what you're doing, and then you start to become comfortable and taking charge. And, I don't think he showed really any signs last year of being over his head. In fact, I thought, from an in-game perspective, the way he managed the clock, the game plans they went into for most of the season, discounting the opening game, I thought he looked like he was light years ahead of what we thought he would be. But, from his background and being a defensive guy, that was the main focus of the offseason. And, I think actually going back to Bellotti is a great comparison, because there was always something that was, when they started the next season, it was very obvious that that's what they worked on. And it would have been fun to see Bellotti with the transfer portal and what he would have been able to do. But look, the reality is Oregon brought in 5 brand new starters on defense from the portal when you talk about, and they didn't just bring in warm bodies to be starters. They brought in guys that started in the SEC, guys that started in the Big Ten. So he clearly identified that the defense was a weak point last year and went out and got guys that were going to come in not only to start and be really good upgrades from that position, but also to push the guys that were on the roster, because he knows that if you're going to ultimately get Oregon to where he wants to go, you're not seeing programs like Georgia and Alabama take 20 portal guys every year. They take 3 or 4 where they really need to go. And Oregon's not at that position yet. So they still took 12, 13 guys, and you're going to start to see that go down a little bit every year, taking 7 or 8 and then 6 and then 3 once he gets the roster where he needs to go. But he identified they needed to get faster at linebacker, they needed to get faster off the edge, and they needed to get bigger and longer in the secondary. And that's what he did with the portal. The special teams last year was terrible for most of the year, aside from Camden Lewis, which was kind of a surprise, bringing in, having brought in Joe Lorig and being this renowned special teams coach. And they went in and they brought, I don't even know how many new kickers and punters are on the roster. I think they brought in at least 6 between the two positions. So I think he did a very good job. Now, we haven't seen the results on Saturdays yet, but, just watching the spring game, even when they're going 70%, it was very obvious that the defense looks bigger, faster, longer, which they definitely needed to get. and the special teams look better. So I think going all back on that, those are the two big things. If those areas can take even a slight jump this year and the offense stays where they're at, you're looking at automatically going from 10 wins to 11, maybe even 12, because the reality is, outside of Georgia last year, those 2 losses should not have happened. They had those games in their hands, especially the Oregon State game, and it slipped away. And that's where you can probably look back on an individual game basis and say that's where he can improve. He let the Oregon State game just completely go. But no one really knows what happens in that game to have such a commanding lead and just completely watch it evaporate. So, specifics, defense and special teams, from an overall perspective, how he manages turmoil and when something's going wrong in game, that's where I want to see them improve this year.
Also gets a pretty good paycheck. He gets bumped up to around $7 million per. And I know for a lot of Oregon fans, most of the time college football fans, Joel, you know this, they don't care about the buyout, right? Because buyouts are, by and large, kind of irrelevant. Somebody wants to leave. Somebody will find a way to pay for it. But I think Oregon came in with the idea of, hey, lost 2 coaches, want to commit to you financially, need a commitment from you long-term, and the $20 million buyout, I think, nice, fair spot on both sides. I know it goes down every year he's there, but I think Oregon say, hey, you proved it in year 1, you get $7 million per. It's incredible to think that Oregon's paying a coach $7 million, and it's not an astronomical sum of money, but that's where we are right now. But then the $20 million buyout to kind of protect themselves.
It was a big investment, and I give it a 10 out of 10 if you see where I'm going with this. Because, look, the reality is Oregon needed to invest in Lanning, but he was not going to take that investment if he didn't know what the plan was. And we're not going to be privy to it until it comes out officially. The writing's on the wall. He's not going to sign up to stay on in a Pac-12 conference that is dying a very, well, I don't even want to say a slow death. Now it's kind of a rapid death. That behind the scenes, him and Rob Mullins and Phil Knight and Pat Kilkenny and all the powers that be are very up to date on what is going on. He does not sign that contract, which is pretty ironclad. I mean, that was a lot of the language in that was very, very much him saying, I'm invested in this just as much as Oregon is invested in me. And he's not taking that to be part of a lower conference because this is a guy whose star is on the rise. I mean, he's still only 36 years old. He wins 10 games his first year. He has a background of national championship caliber coaching. His coaching tree that he's come from is top of the game. So he is someone that if in 2 or 3 years could go anywhere he wants. And he chose to sign that contract knowing that any school that comes for him is going to have to back up the truck to get him just out of the contract, not even counting what they would have to then pay him to go to that school. So that, I think, if you're an Oregon fan, is the most telling and reassuring thing is all of this, conference realignment comes to a head pretty soon. He's invested in Oregon just as much as they are in him, and that should tell you exactly where they're going. I don't want to say it's Big Ten money that got it or that they know it's coming, but look, I've been saying it for a year that Oregon's going to end up in the Big Ten. They're not going to sit back and just fall by the wayside. They've put too much time and energy into making this program what it is. Now, look what happened this weekend. A lot of reports starting to kind of come up a little bit here. So where there's smoke, there's fire, and the smoke is getting thicker and thicker by the day. So I think it's a great investment by Oregon. I think you have to feel really good if you're a fan, but this is a guy who really does seem to be invested. The buyout is not something we talk about a lot. That is a big time commitment because you think about it, if you go for a coach like Dan Lanning, if you're, let's say Nick Saban retires and 2 years from now, Oregon is continuing to rise. You're not there. If a school like that comes for him, they're not just paying for him. They're paying for his assistant coaches because he's going to want to keep his staff with him. They're going to pay for his strength coach, his support staff, everything. So to put that $20 million price tag on just getting in the door to get him out, that tells you all you need to know. They want him here. He wants to be here. I think it's a great thing, especially going into the beginning of the season. Now it's not even a talking point going forward.
Joel Gunderson, ScoopDuck, friend of the program, joining us here on 620 Rib City Radio. I want to talk about Oregon's change at offensive coordinator. I was talking about this earlier, Joel. I don't think it's not significant, but I do think it's one of those overrated things when you start talking about continuity between players and coordinators. I saw Chip Kelly in about 2 months make Dennis Dixon a pretty mediocre also-ran quarterback to a Heisman Trophy contender, and it took about 2 months. They didn't need a lot of continuity. Good coordinators, I think, get the most out of their players, regardless of how long they've been there. But it is always a bit of a risk whenever you go from what was working, and Bo Nix and Kenny Dillingham, it worked so much it got him a job at Arizona State. So now Will Stein comes in, and I guess if you are going to bring in a coordinator, having a fifth-year senior guy like Bo Nix as your quarterback, probably the best way to do it. But I always wonder, every once in a while, you don't always, Oregon's not immune from hiring bad coordinators, if you know what I'm saying. I don't think he is one, but I think it is a significant change that I think a lot of Oregon fans might kind of be overlooking, and maybe that's because you got Bo Nix just coming back.
Well, you have Nix coming back, and so far Lanning's track record is very short of hiring coaches, but so far it all seems to be working out pretty well. I mean, the one person you could maybe kind of look at a little bit interestingly would be Tosh Lupoy, and he was probably the coach that fans were most excited when he finally came here. And again, we talked about it on Friday, but when you have a guy that he brought in Stein, who is basically, they have all said, look, we're not changing a whole lot. Now, they're going to change stuff. You can't run the same offense that Dillingham did because, the game changes every year. But a big part of it, and this is something Will Stein said when he got hired, is, when you come from an offensive standpoint, it's so much more about the actual scheme than the players, because he can scheme up anybody to get open. And when you come to a place like Oregon now, they have really built up the skill position the last couple of years, because it was not an area of strength under the previous staff. So he can come in now, and his scheme and system that worked, at UTSA, now he comes up and he's got guys at receiver that are going to be first or second round NFL talent, which he didn't have before. So it's easy, I think you're right, to overlook and just assume, hey, just, the next guy in the wheel, just bring him in. Dillingham left, Stein in. When Stein leaves, bring the next guy in. It's not that simple, but I think they did the right thing by bringing in a guy that clearly has the same vision of what Lanning and Dillingham had last year. And you're right. If they were handing the reins over and this was, Ty's first year at starting quarterback, or if they had to go to the freshman, Austin Novostad, then you'd be a lot more nervous because, he doesn't have that experience. Those guys don't have the experience to make adjustments where it's needed. But if you're bringing a new system, it feels a lot like the old one that Nix was obviously very comfortable in. And he was he was very much involved in the hiring process. Now, I doubt that he was the final say, but, Lanning's not going to sign off on this guy if Nix did not feel comfortable with what he was going to bring to the table. So, you might see a game or two that it doesn't look great. You're certainly not going to have the start of the season they did last year. I mean, we talk about Dillingham as the savior that came in for a year and they scored 3 points the first game of the year. So it's not like it was all roses the whole time. And, Stein has a much softer landing port coming in with Portland State and Hawaii in the first 3 weeks. So, it's going to look very, to the naked eye, it'll probably look very similar. They're probably going to score a lot of points. But again, they're going to run the football and they're going to use play action, just like they would any other year. That's what Lanning likes to do because he knows that's how you win games. It's what he's seen his whole coaching staff, his whole coaching career. So, I don't expect a lot of changes. I think if Nick stays healthy, and that was the only thing that kept the last year from being a more magical season, he stays healthy. I don't see any drop-off personally. It might look a little different, but it's still going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, maybe don't play the half the Philadelphia Eagles in week one. Maybe just not do that. Maybe just never, I know, and you can't, I can't, I know you probably, and I don't know how cryptic it was, but there was the Bucky, the Buckeye from Ohio State, and there was a cryptic Instagram, and we can read into that what it is, but it seems as though Ohio State probably going to make up that game at Autzen. I don't know where college football is headed, Joel, and I know I'm in the minority on this because everybody likes these big time games. Buy out of that. Just cut a check, buy out of that game, play Idaho, score 70, and move on. I just quit playing these ridiculous big-time matchups in the preseason. I hate them.
Well, they're going to come here to the conference opponent in a few years anyway, so it's going to be fun. No, I'm with you, and it kind of depends. Look, if you're Oregon, and I still think the Georgia game was a good thing last year, and it was painful to sit through. And But you saw throughout the season where they, obviously took that game to heart. And I think a big thing that Lanning did, and, I think we talked about it when I came on, but he knew they were going to go into that game and get exposed. He did not change the offensive system to move away. He knew what the Georgia defense was going to look like. He said, look, we're going to run our system for the rest of the year. It's going to get exposed against Georgia because they know exactly what we're going to do defensively because they know me as a defensive coach. So, not that he went in to lose the game, but he said it's more about building for the future. And I think that's where games like that can really be beneficial. Now, in 2 or 3 years, if they have continued to build the roster and they're going for a national championship and they truly look like a team that can contend, that's where I agree with you. Now you start to move away from those games, or you put yourself in a more favorable matchup. You don't play Georgia in the state of Georgia and count it as a neutral site game. You play a TCU or a Michigan State in, a random place in California, and you put yourself in a game that still maybe has some juice to it, but you're not setting yourself up for complete failure, because when you're to the point then where you're like, hey, we have to go undefeated because we have the record to do it. The playoff system has changed. If you find yourself in the Big Ten, you're going to need to have all your arrows when you get into conference play. So you don't want to go get beat up in game one and then have to run the gauntlet of playing teams like Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State. And yes, I'm completely just bypassing the Pac-12. I get it. And this might come back and bite me down the road. But you get my point of, like, right now, I think it works out. I think it's okay. But in a couple of years, they're going to have to reevaluate and start wondering if it's worth it. Because look at Ohio State when Oregon came there 2 years ago. They were not expecting to lose that game. Yeah. And, it ended up not really costing them a lot in the long run. But it was an eye-opener of, like, these games, you have to be careful in how you play it. Ohio State didn't need to play Oregon for the notoriety. Oregon played that game, and that benefited them 10 times more. They would have benefited Oregon 10 times more had they gone and simply been competitive and lost maybe late in the fourth quarter. The fact that they came in and won just showed how much more it was important to the program of Oregon versus the program for Ohio State.
Joel Gunderson of ScoopDuck joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio. One last thing before we let you go, Joel, because I am fascinated by Ty Thompson. Fascinated by him. I don't know if I've ever known an Oregon player that has played less minutes of football, but has had more of an emotional high, low, high again reaction from Oregon fans in terms of kind of changing of opinions of a guy that's maybe played 5 quarters of football for Oregon, but he is back on the roster. He will be the backup quarterback, I would assume. But I'm now, it's funny because it was like, oh, get Anthony Brown out of there. Put Ty Thompson in. Turns out it was Mario Cristobal's fault. Then we all hate Ty Thompson. When is he going to transfer? And now it's like, well, he stuck around. It's like, well, now I kind of like this kid's gumption. And then he's stuck around a little bit. Now we're all rooting for him again. Joel, I've known a lot of players at Oregon. I don't know of a player at Oregon who has played less than Ty Thompson that has had more fan emotional high and low relationship with than Ty Thompson has.
Yeah, well, you talked about Dennis Dixon earlier, and he obviously played a lot more than Ty, but it kind of reminds me of his story, too, where it's like, boy, for 2 or 3 years there, you can see that kid had a lot of potential, but it just never clicked, and then, bam, he gets the right OC, and here we go. But you're right, and that's where I talk about, I really value the ability for a kid to transfer and go where they want to go. I think they're 18, 19, 20 years old. They do not need to be locked in and not be able to pursue their dreams. But on the same token, if he's willing to stick around and build up his reps in practice and continue to try and get better, what a better story! What better story could there be than if he comes in next year, or God forbid something happens to Nick this year and he has to come in and he actually has turned the corner. I mean, that's kind of what it's all about. It's a little bit fairy tale-ish, but there's two sides to every story. And as I said, maybe he's just one of these kids that doesn't necessarily live and breathe football and doesn't feel the need to transfer out just to try and find a starting job. Maybe he is happy in Eugene. Maybe he likes getting his education and likes having that role of a mentor. He's behind Nick. They seem to have a great relationship. Maybe that's just what it is. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't know. But I think we sometimes get in this mindset of every kid is going to transfer the second he doesn't get a starting job. As a freshman, you have to, that's where the portal has kind of soured us a little bit. Yeah. It's like, you know what? There are a lot of kids that just want to stick around and get better. And, and maybe Ty knows his limited. I can't imagine that he's sitting there thinking, boy, I'm better than Bo Nix. Why am I not playing? I mean, The results are pretty obvious. So, if he's got that wherewithal and that understanding of, hey, I need to get a lot better, and I'm in a position and I'm in a place where they can make that happen, he's still got 3 years of eligibility. He's got plenty of time to have it all come together. So I think it would be a great story if and when he does get the chance to shine. Ideally, with the early season schedule they've got, he can play the second half of Portland State. He can play the second half of Hawaii. Maybe, things fall right. He can get in there at the end of the Texas Tech game and get a little road experience, if things go well. So it's set up to have him do it. And I think it would be a great story. And I applaud the kid for staying and for doing it the right way. And I applaud the kids that leave the right way, because there's also good ways to leave and bad ways to leave.
But yeah, don't write 3 paragraphs on Twitter and then say "respect my decision." Just go.
Right.
Just go.
Yeah. Look at.
I don't need a love letter from you. You left. That's fine. I support you for leaving. Don't give me a love letter as to how great everything was. If it was so great, you wouldn't write 3 paragraphs and leave.
Exactly. So, it is what it is. And hopefully, the kid's got all the talent in the world. So it would be a great story for him and for Oregon if he could stick around and turn into something. But hopefully we don't have to wait and find out this year. Hopefully it can happen next year, and that gives him a whole another year to keep getting better.
Joel Gunderson, you can find him on Twitter at JGundy85. You can read his stuff at ScoopDuck. And it is football season, boys and girls, so you're going to hear Joel on this program from time to time. Hey, Joel, thanks so much. Have a terrific week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Talk to you tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday.
Boom.
No, okay.